Good day, fellow survivor, and welcome back to another episode of Hammer D20, the show that wishes itself was a powerful wizard. My name is Steven Sobot, and I will be your guide. Today we're going to talk about what I would call the paragon, or the peak of nerd culture, Dungeons & Dragons. See, there's this prevailing idea that Dungeons & Dragons is kind of like one of the nerdiest things you can do. There's this idea that when you play Dungeons & Dragons, you have to dress up in like a robe and wizard hat or like in like an orc outfit, and you have to have the red streamers to act like fireballs. And then there's this idea that like when you're playing this, you can't discern reality from fakeness, and then you go to a bar and then like someone like fights you and you think like, yeah, fireball, and they throw the streamer, and then there's like a long pause and there's a laugh track that happens then, and then the cool main character Jock punches them out, and then everyone's like, wow, yeah, it really showed them nerds. And I think I just wrote an episode for a 1990s sitcom. Regardless, that is far from the average, as many people who play Dungeons & Dragons tend to do it at a table with just a handful of dice, some papers and information about their people they're playing as, and their own friends. Real friends. While the live-action role players, or LARPers as they are called, do dress up and act out the scenes, I think they have a general understanding that what they're playing is fiction and not reality. So, sorry 90s sitcoms. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Usually, myself as a person who plays D&D, I get a lot of the questions of what happens? What are you doing when you're playing a game? So, I figured I have this opportunity to tell you, to demonstrate, to give you a bit of a tutorial as to what is D&D and how can you yourself get yourself into a game. Steven, what is D&D? Well, I'm glad you asked, Steven. Let me explain. Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game that exists in a world far from our own. You yourself are playing as a character that exists in this world where mythological creatures and magic exist as a daily occurrence. It's a game of make-believe, and you as a player have to imagine the world for yourself. There are two important roles in D&D, the player and the dungeon master. The majority of participants in D&D are players, who play as a character in the world, whether it be a wizard, a warrior, an archer, a thief, or any other fantasy-based role or job. You are the main characters of this story, and you make decisions based on the information you are given. The Dungeon Master is the most important role, as they are the main storyteller and referee of this game. You are in charge of the adventure, and you are the one who tells the players what happens, what can happen, what should happen, what you shouldn't do, etc., etc. When players make choices, you determine the consequences, whether good or bad. Because you're the creator of this world, your main task is to create an environment for your players to understand and to play in. You have to follow what your players are planning on doing, what they are doing, and then kind of make something out of this combined effort. And in the end, what happens is you get this grand adventure and tale that you can kind of talk about later. Now, for those who haven't played D&D, it can be kind of hard or daunting to really understand what you can kind of assume what happens in the story. And so I guess the biggest example, or the best example I have, is to imagine the movie Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a high fantasy setting where there's magic, wizards, elves, dwarves, and there are things in it that you can't really explain and that are very different from our world. Let's think of the Fellowship of the Ring as a D&D campaign party. We've got ourselves our elven archer Legolas, and we've got the stout warrior Gimli, and the wise wizard Gandalf. All these people together make decisions and make actions and have suggestions and have their own stories that are kind of work within each other, and together they form themselves a grand adventure. Now, not every campaign's like this, as not every story's just like Lord of the Rings. So that's up for you as players and you as the dungeon master to decide. So before you start a campaign, you have to determine what the campaign's going to be about, and that's up for your dungeon master to decide. Now, this could be a daunting task to create a whole world of imagination for your players to play in. Well, thankfully, not only are there places that you can buy pre-built template worlds and campaigns to play, there are people that you can hire as DMs. if you are too intimidated by the concept of doing a DM yourself. Regardless, most of the time you do just need a DM who's willing to create an imaginative world, and for players and friends who are, willing to play within this world itself. Now, because the game is based on imagination, and imaginations can run rampant, you can't just simply do anything you so choose. D&D has a very strict set of rules and guidelines that allows you to do imaginative things, at least within some sense of realism, that your DM can enforce. Here's an example for a situation that might happen in D&D. A thief runs past you and steals a locket that you have that's very valuable. The thief continues down the street and starts hopping up boxes and to get on top of the roof of a building. What are your options? Well, you got tons of options. Do you continue chasing them down the street? Maybe not, because then you might lose them as they jump over onto the building next door. Do you jump up the boxes and onto the roof yourself? Maybe not, because that takes acrobatic skill, and you can hurt yourself if you fall, or you're not skilled enough. Or do you fire an arrow or a fireball at the thief? Well, maybe not, because that takes accuracy, and if you miss, you might hurt somebody else, or you might kill that thief that you probably don't need to necessarily kill. There are consequences to everything you do, no matter what, and your decisions are based on what you so choose. See, all the things I've described, the following, the jumping, the firing, all require you to make a dice roll. Every action in the game usually needs you to do something like this, and the main dice that you roll is a 20-sided die, otherwise known as a D20. I wonder if I've heard that before in something. Anyway, so you make a roll and you see the result. Let's say you jump up the boxes and climb up the roof. Your DM would say, okay, let's make an acrobatics roll. You roll a d20 and get an 8. That's not good. The DM would say you attempt to climb up the boxes and you fall flat on your ass. You take some damage and the thief has gotten away. However, note that I said make an acrobatics roll. See, each of those rolls you have a base stat that is added to the roll for successful actions. Acrobatics is a skill that you can be trained or inherently good at. So some characters can be better at doing stuff like this. Let's look at a character that I've already made on the website Roll20, a good website for if you want to play Dungeons & Dragons online. This is the main piece of paper that gives you all the information you need to know about your character. And as you're building your character, you'll be filling in the information here. Since I don't have all the time in the world to explain the different details of the character sheet, let's just go to the acrobatic skill, which is right here in the skills section of the page. He's got 2 points in acrobatics. Well, that's not amazing, but it does help that roll out. And if I made that roll of 8, the DM will then add my 2 points to that roll of 8 and give me a result of 10 instead. The DM will then see that I got a 10 and determine for themselves, 10's actually a much better roll. And then they would allow me to jump up the boxes and jump on the roof to continue following along. What happens next is entirely up to me, and it's entirely up to the DM as well. So that's basically how the majority of D&D works. Given situations, you do actions in response to those situations, and you tell everyone what you're doing, you roll to see how successful you are, and then the results happen upon you. Other than the rules, your imagination's your main limit. Sure, you could have followed them like such, or you could have planned to fire a fireball at the building next door that they're running towards, setting it ablaze so they don't have anywhere to go. Or you could scream profanities at them to get them to cry and feel bad. But with each action comes consequences and very high or very low chances of success, and the DM will tell you what happens afterwards. I think that's probably a bit of enough of an introductory look at what D&D kind of is. If you do plan on playing the game yourself, you'll have to then create a character, and there are a bunch of resources online to do that for yourself. D&D Beyond is a website you can go to that gives you a free character creator and gives you access to all the information, a player's handbook, and everything else you'd need to know as an average player. Unfortunately, some things might cost you some money, but it might be good to have a player's handbook so you know generally what it is and what's happening inside the game. I think that's all I can say without getting into too much detail, so I'll just throw it back to you, Steven. Thanks, Stephen. I hope he helped you understand the concepts of what Dungeons and Dragons is and potentially spark some interest so you might want to play yourself. Before we move on to our next segment, we'll take a short break. See you soon. Welcome back. So early in the episode, I was talking about how one can get involved in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. For the most part, the best idea is to do it with your friends, but it can be a daunting task if no one's ever been the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master requires you to have a lot of inherent knowledge of the game and the rules and how others can work together, never mind the concepts of, creating this world for people to play in. I do know, however, that some places, particularly Mankella Monk, do have dungeon masters for hire, people that you can pay to be the main coordinator of a world that you play in. And I'm certain that other hobby stores and board game cafes around town have their own people that they can contact if you need a dungeon master. However, there was one person I know in Hamilton that had taken this concept of, say, DM for hire and created a whole culture, a whole world around different campaigns. This world he called the Third Realm, and this Third Realm is run by the enigmatic innkeeper named Mr. Creek. Mr. Creek is the dungeon master persona that Lorenzo Somma had created for himself as the main host of what he called the Nameless Inn, a location he had rented in Hamilton where he would host over 40 or so people to this massive Dungeons & Dragons campaign that would involve multiple different campaigns working at the same time with different dungeon masters kind of managing each of their own campaigns. And every now and then they would reconvene and kind of work together to create this massive Dungeons & Dragons campaign that's bigger than anything I've ever heard of. So I spoke to Lorenzo about what this was, what the Nameless Inn, the Third Realm, what all this turned out to be, and what he plans to do for the future. Stephen, let's go talk to Lorenzo. Thank you, Stephen. So, Lorenzo, what is Mr. Creek?
What exactly is Mr. Creek? Who is Mr. Creek, really?
Yeah.
So Mr. Creek is one of my alter egos, and is essentially the mascot and main public figure for the Third Realm and the Nameless Inn, which is the business that I run. So, when we were pre-COVID, when we would gather for our sessions, I would be in my full ensemble. And it's all part of the ongoing story that is the Third Realm. And it revolves around this strange, mysterious character, Mr. Creek. My aim is that all of my innkeepers have these alter ego personas that they actually cosplay when we run our sessions, or at least that was the direction we were headed before March of last year, when everything fell apart.
Gotcha.
So Mr. Creek is the head innkeeper of the Nameless Inn. The Nameless Inn is two things. First of all, it's our mission. The Nameless Inn is that's why the Third Realm exists. Our goal is to bring the Nameless Inn into your world, into the real world. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So how it's described, the Nameless Inn is a realm of pure imagination, and it's where all of our D&D games begin. They all begin in this place of pure imagination called the Nameless Inn. We also refer to it as the Second Realm. Okay, so the Second Realm is a realm of pure imagination. You can look however you like in the Nameless Inn. It's the place that we all gather before the adventure begins. We say that the world that you come from, the world of taxes, tablets, and tacos, is a place we call the First Realm. Okay. So the First Realm is the real world, and every session we would meet somewhere in the First Realm to go into the Second Realm, which is the realm of pure imagination. Okay. So you would always be described this inn. It would look like a medieval tavern. You'd be described all the other players, because usually we had a community of around 30 players all playing the same game. And not one big 30-man table, but 30 people all co-creating the same universe. And we would describe this inn, which would help everyone visualize the venue we're trying to open. But then we would say there's an exit in this inn, and the exit leads to a completely different place known as the third realm. And the third realm is where the two realms meet. So it's where the first realm and the second one, where imagination and reality collide in a world that is a co-created role play adventure, where it's almost like a giant, almost like Minecraft meets RPG.
Right.
And that's how we would describe. So when people are like, "Oh, what's the third realm?" Oh, I can't just tell you what the third realm is. I got to tell you a little story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fair.
Yeah. So Mr. Creek would be introduced. Every new player that joined the Nameless Inn would always have the same introduction. They would be introduced to Mr. Creek. They would receive a special gift from him, and they would then be able to join our tables. And like I wear this in public. Like you on Tuesday nights. Now I'm the third rendition of Mr. Creek. There's been two before me. Yeah. Mr. Creek's a time traveler, you see.
Yeah.
Yes. He would tell you when you join him in the Nameless Inn that he was from the year 2020. And it was the year that this great entity known as the End came to the third realm, came to the Nameless Inn, and it ended everything. It erased everything. None of us can now remember each other. We don't know our past. We don't know our future. And Mr. Creek was sent back in time to find everybody once again, bring them all together, and defy the end of the story, or like literally the end, by embracing what he called the everlasting tomorrow, which is basically, let's just role play. Let's role play. Let's have fun. Let's make sure the story never ends. Lo and behold, and that's when I started this in 2016. That was the story, and lo and behold, I guess Mr. Creek was right, because in 2020, his goal was to open this venue by December 31st, 2020, or the end would come. That was the prophecy, and it was also fire under my butt to get it done. But it was all because like I gave myself 5 years basically. But it was also like I have to my intention for Mr. Creek is to unite all of my customers around this idea and have that the community together opens this venue. Because my experience with previous venue ownership, I ran a video game cafe about a decade ago, is that the community is so critical. Because they're the regulars, they're there every day. So that was my mission: find the community, make them part of the story, make opening the inn a collective goal, and have that. When we do open the venue, it's like we had like 50 people help us do it, and then we go on to share with as many people. So the game in the end, the third round, the game, the Mr. Creek, all of that, its real mission is marketing. It was a way to connect people, right? But also just operation wise, this endeavor, the third realm, a co-created open sandbox world of D&D, requires lots of minds that know what's going on, and required lots of trial and error. We used to run 5-week cycles, so it'd be 5 adventures that you'd play at the same table. We'd usually have between 4 and 5 innkeepers; those are your DMs. And we would run the cycles in a 6-cycle season. So we would have 5 sessions, and then we'd have session 6 would be a world building session. So we go 5 weeks of play. The 6th week would be world building. We would all get together at a pub, and we have an entire microeconomy within the third realm. So basically, by adventuring, people earn, we call them eggs. They look like Kinder eggs. And as they adventure, as they cooperate, that's the idea. When they cooperate, or when the table has a good belly laugh, or when just something really exciting happens. In the first realm, in the real world, this little Kinder egg appears. And when they crack it open, in fact, here, so this was our time canister. We got really into it. We had an entire language that we utilized. Yeah.
Sick. Yeah.
So yeah, your egg would contain things like coins. We have hearts. We have little glass hearts. We had little crystals, and these 3 resources represented your way of manipulating the world. So you could use coins to like build a building. You could use your hearts to do things like strengthen a god or start a guild. and you could use, we call them world shards, to enhance the items that you came across. So you would, a big part of the game was you made your own magic items, and in order to make them, you had to play the game. So your actions would determine what sort of manifests around the items you're trying to make. And it would be a back and forth between my team of innkeepers and the players to try and figure out what exactly, do they want to do to have fun. And we would take all of this. So we would take all this world building week 6 stuff, and we would use it to plan the next cycle. So yeah, all of that. The intention is to connect you to the story, not so much because you paid me to do it, but because you're just inspired and want to do it. That's what I need. I need hundreds of people who are using my system, love what they're doing, adding to it, and it'll always be evolving, obviously, and playing, and just coming out and playing and sharing in experiences and sharing in stories and getting to know people without getting to know them. That's the beauty of D&D, is like you can actually really get to know somebody playing D&D with them without any of the superficial stuff. Without knowing anything about them, but you know their character, you know who they are, the type of person that they are, what they laugh at, and all. And I think that's beautiful. And that's what I want to bring to the world. That's our mission. That's our goal. That connection that goes beyond the first realm labels that we give one another. Here you can be anyone you want, right? So yeah, if I can capture that and jam it into a venue, there you go.
Perfect.
Open for business. How hard can it be?
Yeah, it's so easy.
How hard can it be?
Okay, perfect. I'd say that's a fantastic closing statement on the whole thing. So I'd say thanks for coming on, Lorenzo. Appreciate you taking your time to talk to me about this. And I'll just throw it back to you, Stephen. Thanks, Stephen, and thank you for your time, Mr. Creek. For those who have watched previous episodes, you might remember me interviewing Sean Chappell, the co-creator of a new board game he's been working on called Honey Bomb. Since that episode had aired, I've been following the progress of their campaign, and they've changed the name from Honey Bomb to Hibernation. Well, since I had contacted him just recently, they had planned on canceling the Kickstarter campaign and thinking of retooling it for the future. Regardless, I spoke to Sean about what they're planning for the future and what else they might have in store. On to you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. So, Sean, first, how are things with Honey Bomb / Hibernation?
Things have progressed. Of course, we've been running the Kickstarter now for a couple of weeks, but it hasn't been getting the traction that we were hoping it was going to get, unfortunately. So we are going to be canceling the campaign this time around and circling back on the project to sort of see where we have misstepped in our sort of pre-campaign marketing. Unfortunately, when the pandemic came along and kind of canceled our events, our live events, we never replaced them with any online events. So we didn't seek out those opportunities at conventions that had shifted to go online, or playtesting groups or things of that nature, in order to try to get our game out in front of people. And I think ultimately our game is just kind of one of those hidden gems that people didn't realize was going to be available. And so it's not getting the traction that it needs to fund properly. So
that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. With the because what last time we spoke, it was Honey Bomb.
Yes.
And the change to the name Hibernation. I guess what was the inspiration for that, and is it going to stay that name?
So ultimately, yes, we changed the name because Honey Bomb was kind of a working title for us, and we liked it, but it didn't fit the theme of the game very much. And as we were starting to work on our second game, which is sort of in that really, really early, rough stages of development at the moment, we realized that we hadn't started Honey Bomb / Hibernation with the theme. We hadn't really started at that point. And as the game coalesced and became more thematic, we realized that the title didn't really fit with what we had, sort of the mythology of the game itself. Ultimately, we are going to be changing the name again. For everybody who knows or maybe doesn't know, there's actually a pretty beloved game out there in the market called Hive. It's been out since 2000, so it's had 20 years of traction.
Yeah.
People love it, and ultimately we've been getting quite a few questions asking us how our game is different.
Oh.
And it isn't that we've copied or that we've done anything specific to sort of ride the coattails of Hive. It's pretty superficially similar, but that psychological barrier that people have, where there's this sort of this knee-jerk reaction that the game sounds the same, and because of its stature in the board game community, I think that's kind of hanging us up a bit.
I see on your toque that you have some enamel pins, and you mentioned that your next project. Would you like to go into that one?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually had this planned out to run right behind Hibernation. So, like we've been doing mugs with some of our designs there. So this is the Lucky Monday mug, right? All ones. Anybody who has to roll for initiative understands what that means. So ultimately, yeah, we're going to be bringing out an enamel pin Kickstarter. That's something else that we want to try our hand at. So we're coming out with character class pin sets from sort of the RPG world. So a little bit of D&D, a little bit of Skyrim, a little bit of Gothic 3, if anybody remembers that one, a little bit of Gloomhaven. So we want to bring out a whole series of enamel pins based on those ideas.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Sean. Appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
And I'll throw it back to you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for your time, Sean. That's all the time we have for now for Hammer D20. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope all of your dice rolls are natural 20s. I see I used that last episode, and now I've kind of explained as to why a 20 is a good idea. Anyway, see you later.